And this talk is on the relationship between three things: work-family conflict, and marital satisfaction, and also child development. So anyway, the research kind of connects different areas of psychology, because the work-family conflict is an area of industrial organizational psychology. And then the marital satisfaction and child development, bringing in developmental psychology, and oftentimes those fields don't really interact very much. So we kind of were looking at marital satisfaction as maybe a kind of link pin between the two literatures. So in industrial organizational psychology, there's research on work-family conflict with kind of the arrow going from work to family. So work to family conflict, and the idea being that when there's a lot of stress at work, does that end up being taken home? So that people's marriages suffer because of it. And then there's research on the opposite direction. The stresses in the family lead back to work and cause problems at work. So if you're unhappy at home, does that make it more difficult to be effective as an employee? And there's research on both of those, in both of those areas. And a lot of the questionnaires that measure work-family conflict kind of look at those two roles that you have to play as an employee, your work role, and as your family role. That's multiple roles, because it could be as a spouse or a parent, and you also have other family members. You might have an aging parent you have to take care of, so multiple responsibilities in the family role. And the idea is, can we get role overload? Because there's just too many demands on our time and energy and emotions, all these roles we have to play. And when there is role overload, there's conflict. It's like, well, I only have so much time, so I'm going to have to reduce my efforts, for this role, and that's going to make people mad at me and pissed off at me. It's going to create conflict in my life. So work-life conflict is one of the constructs that we wanted to examine. And then we also wanted to look at marital satisfaction, kind of looking at the work-to-family kind of conflict. When there's work-family conflict, when people feel stressed trying to balance work and family, does the quality of their marital relationship suffer? And then the third component is child development. When a marriage is kind of destructing, what are the impacts on the child? Does the child suffer? So for marital satisfaction, there are a number of well-known marital satisfaction surveys. We looked at that. And then for child development, we used the Child Behavioral Checklist, which is a popular instrument for measuring how well your child is doing on a number of dimensions. Things like, we'll talk about it later, but things like, is he aggressive? Is he suffering academically? Is she having somatic complaints, not sleeping well, or getting stomach aches, or withdrawing socially, things like that. Bad things that you don't want to have happening to your kids. So our kind of hypotheses were that when there's overload at work, it can cause work-family conflict. That can kind of make things worse in the marital world, which can have negative impacts on child development. And that sort of is based on the idea of, like if you're in clinical psychology, sometimes the child can be the identified patient, in the sense that parents can be having trouble, but they're not really communicating. You know, they're trying to hide that, and sometimes the child sort of acts out the family difficulty. So the child becomes the identified patient when sometimes, you know, the problem is more with the parents. It's kind of a way to protect the reputation of the family. So there's that sort of research. So before getting into this, just some American in the United States, workers log more hours than in other developed countries. I was read that U.S. and Japanese workers work more hours than people in any other countries. And we have fewer laws supporting worker rights than compared to, say, European countries. So American workers can be under a lot of stress. There's Thompson and Blau highlight a poll that found that 83% of mothers, 72% of fathers in the U.S. say they struggle trying to balance parenting and employment. So it is an issue. It is a problem in the United States. And there are lots of negative impacts from work-family conflict. It's been shown to, at the individual level, when people have, you know, report high work-family conflict, they're more likely to suffer from physical ailments, you know, cardiovascular issues like high blood pressure, or gastronomic like ulcers, skin problems, you know, all sorts of things. And in the workplace, well, and socially, it's related to lower marital satisfaction. And also for the organization, you might say, well, why should the organization care? Well, they should, because when people are experiencing more conflict, their job satisfaction goes down, their commitment to their organization drops, their likelihood of leaving the organization drops, their organizational citizenship behaviors. That's the kind of thing like saying this is a great company and being a good teammate, helping out other fellow coworkers, that drops. And so you get a lot of negative consequences for both the employee and for the company when you have too much of this work-family conflict. So in trying to kind of get some historical perspective, before that, one thing where there's kind of a dearth of research, a lack of research, is we know that work-family conflict has a negative impact on marital satisfaction. And we know that when marriages are conflictual, that can have negative impacts on children. We found very little research on what about work-family conflict and child development. You know, logically, you'd think there'd be a connection, but we only found 3 articles that actually had examined that. It's not very many. That's felt there's a need for this research to see. And the companies don't really seem to be that concerned. It's like, you know, well, we're worried about our workers because our workers take care of us, you know. Well, some companies are worried about their workers. But only insofar as if we don't take care of our workers, you know, it could impact the bottom line, or our reputation, or our customer service. But what about the impact on society? You know, what if overworking the workers not only impacted the workers, but their children as well? You know, then as a company, your destructive influence can have rippling effects beyond just your immediate workers to the kids. You know, that's going to be bad for the country, bad for the community. So that's why we thought this is sort of important research. Sorry, moving around.
You're good. You're fine. I'm sure I can figure out how to get it to fit.
historically, we were thinking, let's say we go back 200 years in time. 200 years ago, 90% of Americans probably lived and worked where? Farms. Yeah. You know, we were an agrarian society. And there were a lot of small individual family farms. And so this idea of work and family being some kind of, you know, separate enterprises was kind of a foreign idea, you know. Everybody worked at home. And the kids worked, you know. The kids worked on the farm. And the farmers not only worked on the farm, they had to raise the kids, you know, to teach them how to read and write and teach them how to farm. And in addition to working with planting the plants and taking care of the animals, you also had to do carpentry and sew clothes, and you're sort of jack of all trades, and take care of and raise the kids. And so, and you know, husband and wife and kids and all, they're all sort of doing this all together. And so, but if you fast forward from 200 years ago to 100 years ago, where are people working? Instead of working on farms, they're working in factories. You know, the Industrial Revolution has transformed our economy and our society, and so factories are built around big machines, and big machines need to be in the cities because they need power. You know, that's where the power sources are. So all of a sudden, you know, there's this migration from rural people living in rural communities to people living in cities, and from doing this farm work, where you're kind of doing lots of everything, to factory work, where you have a kind of more single kind of job, and in a single place. You know, so you leave home, you know, you come to the factory, you work all day, and then you go home. And so that led to this sort of split between work life and family life. And by the mid-20th century, by 1950, we had this idea of the traditional American family, where the father is the primary breadwinner and the mother is the caretaker, and these separate spheres of activity. Actually, I have some research here. In the 1950s, less than 30% of married women with children worked outside the home. And usually, you know, oftentimes if they did, it was out of necessity. And only 23% of married women with children under the age of 6 worked outside the home. So, you know, 2/3 or more were staying at home. And so there's, you know, definitely, you know, father's working, mom taking care of the kids, like Leave It to Beaver and you know, all those television shows from the 50s. Father Knows Best, and, the Doris, I don't remember her name, Donna Reed show. Yeah, they're kind of depicting that sort of life. If we go 30 years later, so this is in the 80s, that same demographic, married women with children, working outside the home, had gone from 30% to 58%. So, you know, almost a doubling. I'm not sure what it is today, probably, you know, probably even more.